The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves as Jacob Morrison rode up the winding trail to the cabin. He'd purchased sight unseen from a desperate widow in St. Louis. After 3 years of wandering the frontier, searching for something he couldn't name, he'd finally decided to settle down. The small log cabin nestled in the Colorado mountains seemed like the perfect place to start, over far from the memories that haunted him. Far from the mistakes that had cost him everything he'd once held dear, what Jacob hadn't expected was the thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney or the warm golden light spilling from the windows into the gathering dusk. Someone was living in his cabin. He dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt at his hip. 3 years on the frontier had taught him caution, but something about the peaceful scene before him made him hesitate. Through the window, he could see a figure moving about a woman from the graceful way she carried herself. She was hanging herbs to dry from the ceiling beams, her movements careful and deliberate. Jacob approached the door and knocked, his heart beating faster than it should for such a simple encounter. The movement inside stopped abruptly, and he heard soft footsteps approaching. "Who's there?" came a voice through the door, melodic, cautious, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. "Jacob Morrison," he called back. "I'm the new owner of this property. I bought it from Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell in St. Louis." The silence that followed stretched so long that Jacob began to wonder if the woman had disappeared. Then the door opened slowly, revealing the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She had dark hair that caught the lamplight like spun silk, pulled back in a simple braid that couldn't contain all its wild curls. Her eyes were the deep green of pine forests, wide with surprise and something that looked almost like fear. She wore a simple dress of blue calico, mended carefully in several places, and her hands, which she clasped tightly in front of her, bore the signs of honest work. But it was her face that stopped Jacob's breath. High cheekbones, full lips, and skin like porcelain touched by the sun. She was stunning. But there was something more, a quality of gentle strength that spoke of someone who had faced hardships and emerged unbroken. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't expecting anyone." Jacob found himself staring and forced his gaze away, focusing instead on the deed in his jacket pocket. "I have the papers right here, miss. Mrs. Hartwell sold me this cabin 3 months ago. I sent payment in full." The woman's face went pale, and she swayed slightly as if the words had physically struck her. Jacob instinctively stepped forward, ready to catch her if she fell. "Eleanor sold the cabin," she whispered, "but she promised. She said I could stay as long as I needed. I'm sorry, miss. I think there's been some misunderstanding. May I ask your name?" The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she stepped back and gestured for him to enter. "Rose," she said simply. "Rose Hartwell." Jacob's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Hartwell, are you related to Eleanor?" Rose moved to the small kitchen area, her movements nervous and quick. "She was my mother-in-law, my husband." My husband was her son, Daniel. The past tense didn't escape Jacob's notice. He removed his hat and looked around the cabin, noting the feminine touches that made it feel like a home-dried flowers in glass jars. Embroidered cushions on the chairs and the lingering scent of baking bread. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said gently. "How long ago did your husband pass?" Rose's hands stilled on the teapot she'd been preparing. 2 years this winter. He died in a mining accident up in the hills. Jacob felt a stab of sympathy for this woman who had clearly been through so much. No wonder she looked so fragile, so ready to flee. She'd lost her husband, and now it seemed her security as well. Mrs. Hartwell, Rose had no idea Eleanor had family depending on this property. "If I'd known—" "It's not your fault," Rose said quickly, turning to face him. "Eleanor was desperate for money. Her husband left debts when he died, and she had to sell everything to pay them off. I thought I had more time." She moved to the fireplace and stared into the flames, her shoulders tense with barely controlled emotion. Jacob found himself studying her profile, noting the proud tilt of her chin despite her obvious distress. "Where will you go?" he asked softly. Rose's laugh held no humor. "I don't know. I have a little money saved, but not enough for passage back east." And once she stopped herself, as if she'd been about to reveal something important. And what? Rose turned to look at him, and Jacob saw tears glistening in her green eyes. I can't go back to where I came from. It's cabin. This mountain, it's the only safe place I've ever known. The word safe caught Jacob's attention. It was something in the way she said it that suggested she was running from more than just grief. Rose, he said carefully, are you in some kind of trouble? For a moment, he thought she might tell him. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then she shook her head and turned away. It's getting late, Mr. Morrison. You must be tired from your journey. There's an inn in the town below. Mrs. Murphy keeps clean rooms and serves good meals. It was a clear dismissal, but Jacob found himself reluctant to leave. There was something about this woman that called to him, not just her beauty, though that was undeniable, but something deeper. A recognition, as if he'd been searching for her without knowing it. What if I said you could stay? The words came out before he could stop them. Rose spun around, her eyes wide with surprise. What? Jacob ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly unsure of himself. Temporarily. Until you can figure out where you want to go. The cabin's certainly big enough for 2 people, and you've clearly been taking good care of the place. Mr. Morrison, I couldn't possibly, Jacob, he interrupted. And why not? It seems to me we could help each other out. You need a place to stay, and I need someone who knows the area, knows how to keep house in the mountains. It would be a business arrangement. Rose studied his face, as if trying to read his motives. Jacob kept his expression as neutral as possible, though his heart was racing. Made the offer on impulse, but now that the words were out, he realized how much he wanted her to accept. You don't know anything about me, Rose said finally. No. You're a widow who's been dealt a hard hand by life. I know you keep a clean house and can bake bread that smells like heaven. And I know you're scared of something, though I can't figure out what. Rose wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that was becoming familiar. And that doesn't concern you? Jacob considered the question seriously. Everyone on the frontier is running from something, Rose. The question is whether they're running toward something better or just running away. Which are you doing? The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She sank into one of the chairs by the fire, her face in her hands. I don't know anymore, she whispered. I've been running for so long I've forgotten what it feels like to stop. Jacob moved closer, drawn by the pain in her voice. Then maybe it's time to find out. Rose looked up at him, and for a moment Jacob saw past the fear to the woman beneath, strong, brave, and achingly lonely. It was a look he recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror for the past 3 years. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't owe me anything. Jacob knelt beside her chair, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Maybe because I know what it's like to need a safe place to land. Maybe because this cabin. It feels more like a home with you in it than it ever would without you. The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise them both. Rose searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her shoulders relax slightly. A business arrangement, she repeated softly. Strictly business, Jacob confirmed, though they both knew it was already more than that. Rose was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, she nodded. All right, Mr. Morrison, Jacob, but I want you to know that I come with complications. Someday those complications might show up at your door, and when they do, you might regret this kindness. Jacob stood and extended his hand to her. Let me worry about that when the time comes. Rose hesitated, then placed her small hand in his. The moment their skin touched, Jacob felt something shift inside him, settling, as if a piece of himself he'd lost had suddenly clicked back into place. Partners, then? Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper. Partners, Jacob agreed, though he suspected they were both lying. The first weeks of their arrangement passed in careful politeness. Jacob slept in the small loft space while Rose kept the main room, and they maintained a respectful distance that fooled neither of them. But gradually, as the days grew shorter and the mountain air turned sharp with the promise of winter, the barriers between them began to crumble. Jacob learned that Rose was not just beautiful but incredibly capable. She could mend anything from clothing to broken furniture, preserve food for the winter months, and tend to injuries with the skill of someone who'd had plenty of practice. She knew every plant and herb on the mountain, which ones could heal and which ones could harm. Rose, in turn, discovered that Jacob was nothing like the rough frontiersman she'd encountered before. He was educated, She could tell from the way he spoke and the books he carried in his saddlebags. He was gentle with the animals and patient. With her, when she flinched at sudden movements, he had eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see straight through to her soul. They fell into an easy routine. Jacob would tend to the necessary repairs on the cabin and hunt for game, while Rose managed the household and prepared for winter. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, she with her mending, he with a bookhand, slowly, carefully. They began to share pieces of their stories. Jacob told her about his family's ranch in Texas, how he'd been groomed to take over the operation, until a combination of drought and bad decisions had cost them everything. He spoke of his younger sister, who had died in a cholera outbreak while he was away on business, and the guilt that had driven him to sell what remained and head west. Rose's revelations came more slowly, like water dripping from an icicle. She had grown up in Chicago, the daughter of a seamstress who worked long hours to keep them fed. She'd married Daniel Hartwell when she was 18, drawn by his promises of adventure and a new life in the Colorado Territory. Daniel was a good man, she said one evening as snow began to fall outside their windows. Kind and patient. He deserved better than what happened to him. What did happen? Jacob asked gently. Rose was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so soft he had to strain to hear it, she said, "He died protecting me from my past." Before Jacob could ask what she meant, Rose excused herself and disappeared into her sleeping area, leaving him with more questions than answers. It was 3 days later that Jacob's questions were answered in the worst possible way. He was returning from checking his snares when he saw the horses, 3 of them, tied to the hitching post outside the cabin. Through the window, he could see men inside, and the sound of Rose's voice, high and frightened. Carried on the wind, Jacob approached carefully, his rifle ready. Through the window, he could see Rose backed against the far wall while 3 men faced her. One of them, a tall man with graying hair and expensive clothes, was doing the talking. Double quotes, ... Enough of this foolishness, Catherine. You've had your little adventure, but it's time to come home. Your father is prepared to forgive your ... indiscretions ... If you return quietly, Catherine. Jacob's blood ran cold as he realized Rose wasn't even her real name. I told you before, Uncle Richard, Rose Catherine said, her voice trembling but defiant. I'm not going back. I'm not going to marry Harrison Blackwood or anyone else you choose for me. Your husband is dead, girl. You have no protector now, no one to hide behind. You'll come with us, or we'll drag you back. Your choice. Jacob had heard enough, kicked open the door, his rifle trained on the 3 men. I think the lady made her choice clear, he said, his voice deadly calm. The 3 men spun around, hands moving toward their weapons. But Jacob's rifle was already aimed and ready. I wouldn't, he advised, not feeling particularly patient. Today, the man Rose had called Uncle Richard looked Jacob up and down with obvious disdain. And who might you be, cowboy? Another one of Catherine's temporary protectors? The man who owns this cabin, Jacob replied. And the man who's telling you to get off my property. This doesn't concern you, Richard said. But Catherine's my niece. She belongs with her family. Funny thing about that, Jacob said, not lowering his rifle. The lady's been clear about where she wants to be. Maybe you should listen to her. Rose Catherine stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Uncle Richard, meet Jacob Morrison, my husband. The lie hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't contradict her. Husband? Richard's face darkened. You remarried without your family's permission? Without proper settlement of your first husband's estate? I don't need anyone's permission to marry. Catherine replied, Daniel's been dead for 2 years. I'm free to choose my own life. One of Richard's companions, a younger man with cruel eyes, laughed harshly. Free. You ran away from your wedding to Harrison Blackwood, bringing shame on both families. You cost your father thousands in broken contracts. You think that makes you free? Jacob was beginning to understand. Catherine Rose wasn't just a widow. Seeking a new life, she was a runaway bride who had chosen love and freedom over duty and money. Gentlemen, Jacob said, his voice still deadly calm, I think it's time for you to leave. My wife has made her feelings clear. This isn't over, Catherine, Richard snarled. Your father has powerful friends, men who can make life very difficult. For your husband, if you don't see reason, then I guess we'll face those difficulties together, Jacob replied. The way married couples do. After the three men left, the cabin fell into tense silence. Catherine stood by the window, watching until their horses disappeared down the mountain trail. Then she turned to face Jacob, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. Jacob set his rifle aside and moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. Rose Catherine, whatever your name is, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Catherine sank into a chair, her hands shaking. My real name is Catherine Elizabeth Fairfax. My father is Theodore Fairfax. He owns half the railroad lines in Illinois. When I was 20, he arranged a marriage between me and Harrison Blackwood, a business associate who needed a wife to legitimize his political ambitions. She looked up at Jacob, her green eyes pleading for understanding. Harrison is a cruel man, Jacob. I saw how he treated his servants, his horses, even his own mother. The thought of being bound to him for life, I couldn't do it. So on our wedding day I ran and came here. I had met Daniel at a church social the year before. He was visiting Chicago on business, and we fell in love. Real love, not the arranged kind. When I couldn't go through with the wedding to Harrison, Daniel helped me escape. We came here and married quietly. Jacob felt a stab of jealousy at the love in her voice when she spoke of Daniel, then immediately felt ashamed of the emotion. Your family let you go? Catherine's laugh was bitter. Hardly. They tracked us here within 6 months. My father offered Daniel money to annul the marriage and send me back. When Daniel refused, they tried other methods. Catherine's voice became very quiet. The mind collapse that killed Daniel wasn't an accident, Jacob. The supports had been deliberately weakened. My uncle's men made sure I knew it, made sure I understood that anyone who tried to protect me would meet the same fate. The revelation hit Jacob like a physical blow. This woman he'd been falling in love with, and he could no longer deny. That's what was happening. Was not just running from an unwanted marriage. She was running from men who had already killed once to get her back. Why didn't you just give in? He asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw her flinch. "'Cause," Catherine said, lifting her chin with the pride he'd come to love, "some things are worth more than life itself. Freedom is one of them. The right to choose who you love is another." Jacob knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "Catherine, they'll be back. Next time, they might not come alone." "I know." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "That's why I have to leave. I can't let them hurt you the way they hurt Daniel. I won't have another man's death on my conscience. What if I said I don't want you to go?" The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Catherine stared at him, her lips parted in surprise. "Jacob, you don't understand. What you'd be taking on? My father has money, influence, men who will do anything he asks. Harrison Blackwood has political ambitions that depend on marrying me. They won't just let me disappear. Then we make sure they can't find you," Jacob said simply. "How?" Jacob had been thinking about this since the moment her uncle and his men had ridden away. "We make that lie you told them the truth. We get married, really married. By law, you'd be Catherine Morrison, not Catherine Fairfax. Your father would have no legal claim on you." Catherine pulled her hands free, standing and moving away from him. "Jacob, you can't be serious. You'd be risking your life for a woman you barely know." "I know enough," Jacob said, rising to follow her. "I know you're brave enough to run from a life you didn't want. I know you're strong enough to survive losing the man you loved and start over alone. I know you make this cabin feel like home, in a way it never did before." He paused, gathering his courage for what he needed to say next. "And I know that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them like morning mist. Catherine turned to face him, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. "You love me?" whispered. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you hum while you work and the way you save scraps for the mountain cats. I love your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you see beauty in simple things." Jacob moved closer, his voice growing softer. I love you, Catherine. All of you. Including the parts you think you need to hide. Catherine's composure finally cracked. She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. You don't understand, she sobbed. Everyone who tries to help me gets hurt. Daniel died because of me. If you marry me, if you try to protect me, they'll kill you too. Jacob gently pulled her hands away from her face, forcing her to look at him. Catherine, listen to me. I've been drifting for 3 years, looking for something to fight for, something to build. Maybe this is it. Maybe you're it. And if you're wrong, if they kill you, like they killed Daniel? Jacob's hands cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Then at least I'll die knowing I fought for something that mattered. It's for someone I love. The kiss that followed was soft and desperate, filled with all the longing and fear they'd been carrying. When they finally broke apart, Catherine rested her forehead against his. If we do this, she whispered, there's no going back. Once we're married, they'll see you as just another obstacle to remove. Let them try, Jacob said fiercely. I'm not Daniel, Catherine. I'm not a gentle man who believes in the goodness of others. I've seen what men can do when they want something badly enough, and I know how to fight back. Catherine searched his eyes and found the steel beneath the gentleness. You really mean it, don't you? You'd marry me knowing it might cost you everything. I'd marry you if it cost me the world, Jacob replied without hesitation. The wedding took place the next morning, performed by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the valley. Mrs. Murphy from the inn served as witness, beaming as if she'd arranged the whole thing herself. Catherine wore her best dress, the blue calico that brought out her eyes, and Jacob wore the only clean shirt he owned, as they exchanged vows in the little church in town. Jacob thought about the strange turns life could take. A week ago, he'd been a lonely rancher, looking for a place to settle. Now he was a married man with a price on his head, bound to a woman whose past could get them both killed, and he'd never been happier. Catherine's hand trembled. She placed the simple gold band on his finger, a band that had belonged to Daniel, though neither of them spoke of that. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion he'd been holding back for weeks. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, talking softly by the fire about their hopes and fears. Jacob told Catherine about his dreams of rebuilding what he'd lost, of creating something lasting and good. Catherine spoke of her longing for a normal life, for the simple pleasures of tending a garden and raising children without looking over her shoulder. Do you think we'll have that? She asked, curled against his side as snow began to fall outside. A normal life? Jacob tightened his arms around her. I think we'll have whatever we're willing to fight for. The attack came 2 weeks later, in the deep of winter, when the mountain passes were treacherous and help was far away. Jacob had been expecting it, had prepared for it. But the reality was still shocking in its violence. They came at dawn at men, led by Harrison Blackwood himself, a man whose handsome face couldn't hide the cruelty in his pale eyes. Jacob woke to the sound of horses and grabbed his rifle, but they were already surrounding the cabin. Morrison, Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the thin mountain air. Send out my bride, and we'll let you live. Jacob positioned himself at the window while Catherine crouched behind the heavy oak table they'd dragged across the room as a barricade. She's not your bride, Jacob called back. She's my wife, legally married and under my protection. Protection. Blackwood's laugh was harsh and mocking. You think you can protect her from me? I have 8 men out here, Morrison. How long do you think you can hold out? Jacob didn't answer, instead focusing on the positions of the men surrounding them. They were spread out, using the trees and rocks for cover. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed this would be easy. The first shot came from the man positioned near the woodshed. Jacob returned fire immediately, his bullet finding its mark. The man dropped with a cry that echoed across the mountain. 7, Jacob said grimly. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. Jacob moved from window to window, keeping the attackers pinned down while Catherine reloaded his weapons with swift, practiced movements. She'd done this before, he realized, during other attacks, other attempts to take her back. Jacob. Catherine's warning came just as a man appeared at the back window. Jacob spun and fired, the bullet catching the intruder in the shoulder and spinning him away. 6, he muttered, but their ammunition was running low, and Blackwood's men seemed content to wait them out. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob knew they were in trouble. Sooner or later, the attackers would rush the cabin, and there was no way he could stop them all. That's when Catherine made her decision. "I'm going out there," she said, moving toward the door. "Like hell you are." Jacob caught her arm, pulling her back. "Jacob, they're here for me. If I surrender, maybe they'll let you live. And maybe they'll shoot me the moment you step outside." Jacob replied harshly, "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself for me, Catherine. That's not how this works." "Then what do you suggest? We can't fight them forever." Jacob looked at his wife, his brave, beautiful, stubborn wife, and made his own decision. "We make them come to us, but on our terms." He moved to the fireplace and pulled out a burning log, carrying it to the pile of kindling they'd stacked near the door. "Jacob, what are you doing?" "Something that'll either save us or kill us both," he replied, touching the flame to the dry wood. "But at least we'll go down fighting." The smoke began to pour from the cabin's windows and door, thick and black. Jacob had counted on the wind direction. He was right. The smoke blew directly toward the positions where most of Blackwood's men were hidden. "Fire!" one of them shouted. "The cabin's on fire." In the confusion that followed, Jacob made his move. With Catherine beside him, he burst from the back door, using the smoke as cover. They made it to the woodshed before the first shots rang out, bullets splintering the wood around them. Jacob pulled Catherine toward the tree line where his horse was hidden. If they could reach the horse, they had a chance of escaping down the back trail. They almost made it. Jacob was lifting Catherine onto the horse when Harrison Blackwood stepped out from behind a large pine, his gun aimed directly at Jacob's chest. "Going somewhere, Morrison?" Jacob slowly raised his hands, positioning himself between Blackwood and Catherine. "Let her go, Blackwood. Your quarrel is with me now." "A quarrel was never with you," Blackwood replied, his pale eyes fixed on Catherine. "We're just an inconvenience. But now you've made it personal." "Harrison, please," Catherine said, her voice steady, despite the fear Jacob could feel radiating from her. "Let him go. I'll come with you quietly if you promise not to hurt him." "Catherine?" "No," Jacob said fiercely. "Oh, how touching," Blackwood sneered. "The little bird wants to protect her new mate. But I'm afraid it's too late for bargains, my dear. Your husband has cost me time, money, and men. He needs to pay for that." The gun swung toward Jacob, and Catherine screamed. But before Blackwood could fire, a rifle shot rang out from the trees above them. Blackwood spun around, clutching his shoulder, his gun flying from his hand. "Drop your weapons." The voice belonged to Sheriff Parker from the town below, and Jacob had never been so happy to hear anyone in his life. "All of you." What followed was chaos, as Blackwood's remaining men found themselves surrounded by the sheriff and his deputies. Mrs. Murphy, it turned out, had grown suspicious when she'd seen so many armed strangers riding through town, and had sent word to the law. As the smoke cleared literally and figuratively, Jacob found himself holding Catherine in his arms, while Blackwood and his men were loaded into a wagon for transport to the territorial prison. "This isn't over, Catherine," Blackwood shouted as they drove him away. "Your father will never stop looking for you." "Maybe not," Jacob called back. "But he'll have to go through me to get her, and I'm a lot harder to kill than you thought." Later. As they stood in the ruins of their smoke-damaged cabin, Catherine leaned against her husband's side. "We'll have to rebuild," she said softly. "Yes," Jacob agreed, "but we'll build it stronger this time. We'll build it to last." Catherine looked up at him, love shining in her green eyes. "Think your father will really keep coming after us?" "Probably," Jacob said honestly. "But next time we'll be ready. And the time after that, and the time after that, however long it takes. You really meant what you said, didn't you? But fighting for whatever we're willing to build?" Jacob kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, despite the smoke that clung to both of them. "I meant every word. This is our home, Catherine, our life, and I'll spend every day I have left making sure no one takes it away from us." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob and Catherine Morrison began planning their future. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more attempts to take her back, more battles to fight, more obstacles to overcome, but they would face them together, as husband and wife, as partners in every sense of the word, somewhere in the ruins of their cabin, among the ashes of their old life. Something new and stronger was already beginning to grow.